And we're joined tonight by Kate Andrews, economics correspondent at The Spectator, and Sebastian Payne, Whitehall Editor of the Financial Times. Welcome to you both. Good evening. Let's start with The Guardian and their headline, Russia escalates war in Ukraine with attack close to NATO border. And this is the attack just some 15 miles, we believe, from the border with Poland, an escalation of the attack on Ukraine. And the analysis has been that actually it's close to an attack on NATO, Sebastian.
Yes, it's clearly a warning shot Russia have done to obviously try and threaten and intimidate the West, particularly the NATO countries who have been putting many weapons and goods to help the Ukrainian war effort. And this has been a very deadly attack, according to The Guardian tomorrow. At least 35 people have been killed and 134 injured. This really was pretty significant. And as I said, it was very much designed to intimidate and suggest the fact that this is not going to plan, and they want to try and stop the supply of weapons. But I think, in fact, it will have the opposite effect, because I think many of the Western countries have seen that this has not gone to plan for President Vladimir Putin. And if you look at the statement from Boris Johnson, who spoke to President Zelensky of Ukraine this afternoon, the West is still looking at trying to get more equipment out to Ukraine, be it things like generators, be it weapons, whatever it is, to try and help that particular war effort. So it sort of smacks a bit of desperation. But of course, as has been written about extensively over the past couple of weeks, having a leader like Putin who it does not necessarily operate in the normal bounds and is happy to try and push things and push that madman theory forward is not a comfortable place to be. But I think for the West, following this incident, it's time to calm, hold their nerves, and keep focused on the strategy, which is to supply the Ukrainian forces, not get directly involved, and crucially, not get involved in a tit-for-tat with Russia, because that's the sort of thing that could escalate very quickly. And President Joe Biden of the US said this weekend that's the one thing he doesn't want to happen. So if Putin was trying to trigger some response, I don't think you're necessarily going to see it from this awful attack.
Although we have heard from the US National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, quoted in The Guardian, warning that any fire, even accidental, on a neighbouring NATO country would trigger a full-force NATO response. Kate, whatever that means.
Well, this is why Putin's attack on the military base just 15 miles from the Polish border is so worrying, because as we have discovered over the past few weeks, we just don't know how far he would go. And attacking one NATO country is seen under the treaty as attacking all NATO countries. It's very difficult to define what full force would mean there. It still seems that most Western countries are not interested in a boots on the ground approach. As Sebastian, they want to keep supplying Ukrainian forces with weapons, but they do not want to actually intervene themselves. The question now is how far Putin will push that theory, and does he want to push that theory? Does he want to test the West? When he has tested the West over the past few weeks, it has only united these European countries that were seen to be taking very different approaches. Even just a month ago, you now have countries like Germany and even Sweden pledging to up their defense spending, something that you would not have expected to see mere weeks ago. So far it has created unity, but these are obviously very troubling signs from Putin, that he's getting so close to the Polish border. And of course, it's also very close to the city of Lviv in the western Ukraine, which up until very, very recently was seen as a place where you weren't getting those full-scale attacks that we've seen in other parts of Ukraine. The fact that Putin is pushing his troops even further into Ukraine is very worrying for the people who, of course, are still there, still fighting and taking cover.
And Sebastian, we have heard from Russia that this is a deliberate target, that they are targeting those that are a corridor to, in terms of military assistance to Ukraine. So it's not by chance, and this is perhaps something that will be pursued further in future.
Well, indeed. And just to come back briefly to your earlier point about the potential attack on a NATO country, the key thing that we've seen from Putin's strategy so far is to push the line, but not to go over it. So he knew by attacking a base 15 miles from the border exactly what message was sent, but it was not an attack on Poland, which, as Jake Sullivan from the Biden administration said, that would elicit a full Article 5 response for NATO, which means attack on one is an attack on all the members. So I think Putin will keep doing that. But don't forget, he went into this war, he invaded Ukraine with the specific purpose of trying to demilitarize the country. That's what they've said in this so-called special operation, as he describes it, in an invasion and a war as the rest of the world has described it. So it's no surprise they're going after these military bases. But we shouldn't forget that that is obviously a part of the effort to try and win this war, which they are struggling to do. But the attacks on civilians are just absolutely appalling. And again, we've seen more images over this weekend out of Kiev, out of other cities. And it's clear that, first of all, that there are war crimes going on here and the civilian population is being specifically targeted by Russian troops, but also that, you know, this is a devastating effect this is having on Ukraine. The fact is that Kiev was a city of 4 million people. It's now down to 2 million people, its population, and some of the images and reporting suggest it's become a total ghost town, and it's only going to get worse.
But also clear, Kate, that this attack isn't going to deter the West offering help to Ukraine. That's absolutely clear, isn't it?
So far, it only seems that the further Putin goes, the more the West is willing to respond by supplying the Ukrainian forces with more weapons, with more cash, with more support and humanitarian aid, of course. But also, you have seen those economic sanctions, which are really starting to crush the Russian economy. Those reports out of Moscow about, you know, the economy really teetering on collapse. People's bank cards no longer work. They can't scan into the tube because Apple Pay has stopped working. You know, the daily lives of Russians are being severely impacted now, which is obviously going to have an impact. We've had thousands of people arrested in Russia for actively protesting. So that there, you know, part of that will be a moral perspective on the part of many Russians who are just not happy about what Putin is doing in Ukraine. Part of that will be frustration that their normal lives are collapsing. And it has taken the UK some time to get its head around sanctions against individual oligarchs. But you can see almost day by day, Western countries, including the UK, are making advances there. They're willing to go further. There are more steps that the West could take if it wanted to cripple Russia's economy, and it very likely will continue to do so. So far, Putin's actions have only continued to unite the West. As Sebastian notes, he may be trying to test that, going so close to the Polish border with this latest attack on the military base. He may be trying to see what breaks the West in their unity. So far, he hasn't been able to find that crack. All of his actions have brought Europe and the UK and America together in a way that really was never expected to be so united just weeks ago.
And all the while, worth noting that peace talks are continuing between Ukraine and Russia, and positive soundings are coming out of those talks at the moment. Let's have a look at The Guardian, Sebastian, and take us into this story. The former UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon has an environmental warning for the UK.
Yes, there's been a huge amount of chatter in Westminster over the past couple of weeks about fracking. Now, the sort of digging up of shale gas was something the UK has explored, but it's all come to quite a bitter end. And all the fracking sites have been concreted up among environmental concerns, practical concerns, economic concerns about whether this was going to be a viable form of energy production here. Now, it's come back on the agenda because following the Ukraine crisis and obviously the fact the UK and the US are stopping buying oil from Russia, there's been a lot of pressure on Boris Johnson to reinvigorate fracking. And some people in government, like the business secretary Kwasi Kwarteng, have said this is not something we should look into. It's going to take 10 years. It still might not be viable, and it's very difficult to do in the UK, which is a very densely populated country. But then other people in the Tory party say, well, it works very well in America. We need to get on this, and we need to focus on energy security, not net zero. And in this comment, Ban Ki-moon says, you know, we're at a very dangerous point, that we should not resile from the net zero ambition, but we can't look at it doing through fracking, which, as I said, some people allege is dangerous and not sustainable. But I think it is a very interesting debate because the UK did try this. There was a moment where fracking seemed to be a sort of Hail Mary pass for the UK's energy production, but that now seems to have pulled back. So I imagine there'll be a lot of noise about this from MPs and from Number 10, but I'd be very surprised if it actually goes anywhere, not least due to the objections of local residents, as we saw when fracking was tried in Lancashire last time and came to a very abrupt end.
Kate, let's turn to The Telegraph. We've just got time for this story. Dominic Cumberbatch at the BAFTAs has said that he's going to be willing, or he's actually going to go ahead and house a Ukrainian refugee given the opportunity.
Yeah, so the Baptist tonight, Benedict Cumberbatch has announced that he will look into hosting a Ukrainian refugee, which is something that theoretically many of us will be able to do here in the UK when the Homes for Ukraine scheme comes into action, which has been now announced by Michael Gove, the Levelling Up Secretary. There's still a lot of questions around the scheme, and the Telegraph reports that there's going to be a lot of bureaucracy around it, a lot of hurdles to jump over. People who are hosting Ukrainians are going to go through background checks. There's going to be, you have to commit to doing it for at least 6 months. There's still a lot more red tape in the UK, even with this new and improved scheme from where we were a few days ago, than there is in the rest of Europe. So one does have to wonder how many extra Ukrainian refugees this will actually allow to have be host in the UK. But we're in a much better situation, at least now, with the government having innovative policy solutions as to how we can help more refugees than we were just a few days ago.
Indeed, but as you say, many questions still to be answered and policy to be ironed out, i.e. how people will be supported if they do take in refugees.